Dan Harris has built an entire life on recognizing the importance of being part of the autistic community, be it as a person that is neurodiverse themselves or someone that is supporting people that are neurodiverse. Dan's little boy is a wonderful young man called Josh. You'll hear loads of stories about him if you just read Dan's feed on LinkedIn. And he is the most adorable human being that is being supported in most beautiful of ways by his father and his family. And the efforts that Dan is expending are amongst the most extraordinary that I have ever witnessed. He has started a charity called the Neurodiversity charity, talking about neurodiversity in business. And he is obviously championing the cause of understanding the strengths of neurodiversity. Listen to this conversation that touches on autistic families. It touches on what it is being the father of children that have a need of being understood in different ways, and what it is being a genuine advocate from the heart. We have set off to uncover why is it that there is such a thing as what I call autism stigma, instead of there being such a thing as what I call autism in the workplace. And we have a very special guest here today. It's one of the first episodes. We haven't quite decided which order we're releasing the first time in the first season. The reason we wanted Dan to join us really early is because Dan has spent the last few years, and I'll let him tell you how many, fighting exactly essentially these and for these topics, if that makes sense. Against the prejudice and for these topics. So welcome, Dan. Thank you for coming to talk to us about this. Am I right, first and foremost, let's jump right in, to say that you've been fighting autism stigma for quite a few years now?
Yeah, that's right. I guess very kind of publicly over the last perhaps kind of 5 years, but before then in a slower, more moderated way, kind of with our own little personal battles that weren't public, yes.
That's a very interesting thing, and I should have started there. I've not yet arrived at the correct terminology for it, but I'm actively working on it, which I'm hoping to hear out of more people these days. The question I had should have been centered around disclosure. I should have asked from the beginning. Obviously, we are in this context and we're having this conversation about neurodiversity, but maybe a good starting point would be for all of us, would you agree, if we started by saying, are you happy to disclose your neurodiverse identity?
Yeah, more than happy. I think that, where we have the privilege and the comfort to do so, we should be shouting about it, because I love what you're doing and others in this space, because what we need to be doing is just normalizing this, right? We need to be talking about the fact that cognitively, just as you have lovely blonde hair and I have short brown hair, our physical bodies are different. Why would our brains not be different? So yes, to answer your question, I'm an autistic ADHDer, and proudly so. And I talk about this that's the new term.
We're probably the worst kind, so welcome.
Look, lots of complexity, and the contradictions are still something that I'm kind of coming to terms with, and people around me. But yeah, I think that where we can do, and I'm, as a white male, relatively well off, well educated in a first world country, I recognise I have a lot of privilege, so I can shout about this. Others aren't in that position, so I hope that I can kind of play my little part in normalising this. Yes.
Right. So to backtrack even a little bit more for context of our listeners, in case I have failed at yet another introduction, which seems to be my trademark details. I have a lot of research to work on this magnificent introductions that will show you in the best of light. And unfortunately, if I know me and my ability to time manage lately, that's going to fail. I'm ADHD as well. Great intentions. Obviously, we have a little bit of time, a bit wrong with execution sometimes. Could you backtrack us a little bit that and tell us kind of, when have you become happy to disclose? When have you become aware you have a diagnosis? And kind of what has your journey been through the business world? I suspect you haven't, you're not what you, with all due respect and not knowing any better, I do not believe you're young enough to have known all along. It has been one of those happy people who have been not happy people. I think that's severely back. And I realize how easily I'm going to RSD, everyone listening to this, but there is a level of support that some people have had through school that I'm oftentimes envious of, and I suspect you may not have had it. When did you first find out you were autistic, and what was your journey like?
Yeah, well, look, it's a really interesting one, and it's one that I don't think we talk about a lot. And purposely, I did a few YouTube videos at the time because I wanted people to see, you know, what my kind of query was, what the actual assessment was, and then what the post-diagnosis was like. But to answer your question, so I have an amazing 10-year-old little boy. He's not so little anymore. We call him the Joshy man. He's a non-speaking autistic boy, and you know he and through me, we're kind of big advocates for autism empowerment. And I say empowerment rather than understanding or acceptance, because I genuinely think we as a society need to move forward. And so, you know, I kind of had these suspicions. My family did. I had some of my workmates for many years, particularly kind of growing up. But we just in those days didn't really have the language, right? It was just, you know, this guy's a little bit different, you know, processes information different, maybe socially interacts differently. But when I got round to having Josh, and he fortunately got diagnosed really young, as about 2.5 years old, which is pretty kind of unusual. I was reading his medical report, Duena, and you know, every third sentence I would pause and think, wait, that's me. Wait. Okay, now I understand myself a little better. Reading through these.
Because we felt the exact same way, and so do parents of every other autistic kid that found their autism through their kid. I'm sure that's me.
And there's a big uplift, isn't there, at the moment? And, you know, this is a good thing, I think, and particularly for females and girls who have been, you know, traditionally really doubly marginalised because the diagnosis routes and the pathways to support are not set up to recognise and then support those people. I think that we are seeing a big uptick. And unfortunately, as you know, there's a big media pushback now. I think we are being successful in the extent of society's hearing from us, but now we're getting that right-wing, sometimes pushback, whereby, you know, does ADHD even exist? You know, aren't we all autistic, etc.? You know, these terms that are just, you know, terribly damaging, but they're somewhat down to the fact that society is understanding this topic better. So just as other social movements have been through that period of, you know, rapid growth and understanding, we're now in that period, I think, where, you know, certain parts of society and possibly some parts of media with a narrow self-interest, they're pushing back, and we're in that kind of tension here, and I think now.
I like that perspective. I think that's hopeful, in particular because, you know, it's very easy for each of us that are autistic and are in the workplace to forget that there are local contexts and there are very different lived experiences. And it's I often say, and Dan knows, and the very few interactions we've always had, I always come back to that is only one specific country or one specific part of the universe or one specific part of the political spectrum. And what we see at large, I think, in if you look across the board, across industries, you know, obviously across geographies, is a hardening of society and a closing in of society and a lack of the tolerance that we've worked so incredibly hard to build. And I think what you're referring to, and I sense that as well, is that despite the fact that there are structures in place and insane work from organizations like yours and local organizations that are attempting such immense change, the truth remains that society at large in most places is incapable to deal with the fact that, or not incapable, is not equipped to deal with the fact that, number one, a large proportion of those people around us are autistic. What number that is, it's a very interesting debate, and I wish we took that debate openly and not as fearfully as we do. It's a different topic. But then the second part of that is, in that case, how many of us are already in the workplace, and what does that mean for your leadership in particular layer, where you have probably right now these days insane
I would say, imposter syndrome, where people are desperately finding this same diagnosis that you found and others found and I found and millions of us found in the same way, but equally sitting on that diagnosis and not disclosing because of this generalized fear of there being repercussions in the workplace. Would you say that's something you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I'm an eternal optimist, so I am kind of really positive about the future. But the depressing aspect of what you just said is, for example, I'm with a big global media organization in a couple of weeks doing a live TV interview, and they were desperate to get through neurodiversity in business corporate membership. They were desperate to get a CEO, an autistic CEO, to come on with me, and I couldn't find one. From all of the organised, well, they were
Me to the right number. Let me know.
as much as I love you, I should have completed that sentence. They wanted a FTSE 100 or FTSE 250. They wanted the CEO, he or she, who is leading an organisation that is really huge, global. Now, I couldn't find. I went through all of my network, and the reality is, having spoken to some who I know autistic and I know are CEOs, what they've told me is that they feel it would be damaging for their career. They don't want to give ammunition for people who don't like them or potentially would look to move them on from the board, etc. So it's shocking that we're still in that place. And I'll just conclude with one kind of analogy. Post-COVID, post the kind of lockdown situations and people working more hybrid, it's perfectly acceptable for me to say, boss, on Friday at 4:30, I'm going to need to leave the office earlier because I have to pick my little girl up from karate. At least in my little bubble, in the Western world, in the professional world I operate in, I can feel confident in doing that. What's totally unacceptable is to put my hand up in a board meeting or an SLT meeting and say, sorry, boss, I'm not feeling this. I'm not processing the information in the way that you're intending to get it out. We haven't set an agenda. We haven't done any prep work. We're not taking notes as we go along. We're not agreeing actions. We're not documenting we're not allowing for processing time and discussion. That is just something people don't do. How many times do you see people put their hand up and kind of call a halt for the meeting? It just doesn't happen. And that's what I know you and I are fighting the same battle to get to.
Because indeed, this is the crux of the matter. I've spent the last 15 years in the business world creating a product that enhances the ability of people to put their hand up practically. What we do is we attempt to keep teams with the ability of having psychological safety, because that ingredient of what you're describing is you need to have enough psychological safety in that teams for your divergent voices that know they are probably going to say something that's not going to be as easily typically acceptable as it would be from their peers, to speak up and to say what they see, because that is where you get your diversity in the team from. That's where you get your ideas from. That's where you get your canaries in the mind from. That's where you get the people that you can drive very different points of view from that you could never extract out of your typically neurotypical team, right? So we all know that instinctively what we genuinely do or do not do in an everyday fashion to kind of help people understand that it's safe to genuinely give their opinions is what makes the difference between a culture of winning and a culture of not. So in the world that you see around, and I know that your perspective is that we say this all the time, right? And I think I find that us autistic people, I get to say that is, I sound bad saying it, I don't like saying it, speaking for all these people together, but I feel that we've sometimes acquired a plus, and that is that realistically, we know that the resilience is not disputable and the resilience is not correct with this. What is facing, but it's not. We're not in a place where we can find resilience optional. For us, it is a mandatory, existential building block. If there's no resilience, we can't have possibly raised a family. We can't have possibly been functional members of society, professionals, and so on. I find that kind of like this particular segment, if you wish, of white collar digital workers, technology workers, STEM workers, teachers. There's a large, if you wish, segment of population that has arrived at their autism later, like you have done. And then the question becomes, the workplace accommodation, like you well pointed out, is not that fine. You can leave earlier because you're not a special kind of person. It has got to do with stigma. And I think that's where we should come back and say it is impossible for us to create those, I think, workplaces within children if at the top you start with leaders that are here to dispose themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. So that old adage that culture eats strategy for breakfast, you could have a wonderful neurodiversity at work program, but the reality is, unless people feel, particularly at the very junior levels, that they can talk about this topic, you're going to get nowhere. And, this is why, I didn't give this introduction earlier, but I founded a charity called Neurodiversity in Business. We're the corporate voice for neurodiversity, and we've got 1,000 roughly corporate members. They're like the global big ones, the Google, the Amazon, the McDonald's, the JP Morgans. And this is why I'm really proud of what those organisations do, because one, they're coming out with a public commitment, but two, they're being quite intelligent about it. They're being humble to say, look, we want to become a neuro-inclusive employer of choice, but you know what? We're not there yet. We recognise we've got a lot of work to do. We recognise we're at the early parts of this journey, but we're at least pointed in the right direction. I tend to say when I've got big corporates joining, yes, you can join NID, but what I'd really love is, a handshake photograph with your CEO. And that's not because they're kind of incredibly vain. It's actually because there is a disproportionate impact on particularly junior members of that organisation of seeing, gosh, the CEO, he or she has taken out half an hour of their time to meet with Dan and to join NIB, etc. So that tone at the top is incredibly powerful. But the other thing, I'll switch to being a little bit more positive here, is that, and I'd be interested in your views on this, is that some of the younger generation that coming through the kind of the recruitment pipeline, I'm so pleased at how open they are. What we're finding is that actually they will tell us proactively that I am dyslexic and this is what I need from you, or even better, I have dyslexic thinking, right? That's a lot more positive way to think about it. Or, I'm autistic and these are my strengths and these are the things that you need to do in an interview process so that I can demonstrate my true value. So there is hope because we and others are talking and shouting about this, and others are now saying, well, look, if this is now a commonplace discussion, I want to talk about it as well.
Right. I wasn't trying to catch up. I was so excited about the idea of people coming through early in the process and as their authentic self by saying, this is where I fit an interview from. I'll be honest, I don't know that having to come in this strong was either necessary for them, that looks like a failure for our generation, or is going to work as well as we would like it to work. I feel like because of this what I see is a serious discrepancy between what this diversity theater in the corporate world and what it really means in terms of being honest and being authentic in the work world. So to hear that discrepancy, we cannot wait for this new generation that comes in with boundaries and demands, because some of these are, and more importantly, we cannot even discuss these boundaries and demands in a way that's making elegant sense for us as a corporate entity, as an employer, as a mentor, right, as an anything, because what they are coming into is a broken workplace, and we know that it's a broken workplace, and we know that it's not elegant, and we know it's not good, and we know we don't value people, and we know we treat them as resources, we know we have a lot of what I call remaining human debt in the workplace, right, and we have a lot of that in society as well, but in the workplace, the new generation is going to hit that straight on when they're not going to give you a year or two for that picture to finally make a difference. For me, you have finally taken enough slaying engagements to talk about how I've been autistic for my life. They're not going to wait for that. They're going to come into the workplace and say, I am not taking this job unless you care about my ReadMe, and you offer me these things back. The organization cannot offer things like that back, unfortunately. So what we're, I think, living in is a world where there's so much crippling human debt in the organizations that they can't, at the base, they stand across the organization cannot offer back the things they'd like to, simply because there's not enough big value, human value, open-heartedness, understanding of emotions to give it to them yet.
That's right. But then I think another thing that we need to be humble and proactive in acknowledging is that you and I are again in quite a rarefied bubble here. We also need to be thinking about those people from different socioeconomic backgrounds, from different ethnicities and races and religion. You know, I guess the thing to say is that when we talk about this corporate world, we're talking about those organizations who have the big budgets for D&I programs, who can tailor their recruitment processes. The real driver of economic success, at least in the UK, is not those global multinationals, it's the small and medium-sized enterprises. My vision is that, at least this is why I set up NIB, is that, you know, let's show society that business can lead society in creating a neuro-inclusive workplaces. But the ultimate aim should be that vast majority of people who work in medium-sized organizations who may not have that privilege that you and I do. And particularly, you know, for example, the ability to kind of self-disclose when you're on a frontline retail job is significantly different from if you're, you know, a white male in the professional services corporate world. That's the longer term play, isn't it? And look, I set up NIB because I wanted to change the world for my little boy, the Joshy man. The reality is, I don't know that he's going to get into the Amazon and the Google and etc. That's why I was so thrilled to have such a positive partnership with McDonald's, because you know, we know how many of our younger folk start their employment cycle in McDonald's, and you know, if they can have a positive experience there, who knows where that potential could lead.
And also, it's never necessarily been. I did this with the vibe of grain and salt that my first woman in Forbes of her generation and used to be a magistrate grandmother. She would not take offense to this, but not everyone needs to have like academic degree, and it's not a prerequisite of happiness that people work an office job. On the contrary, in fact, this is what we're finding out every day. So what we want as parents, I think, of autistic kids, and I think I speak for most of us, is that our kids are free, they're happy, they're giving their full potential to the world, and they're kind of doing the same thing that every other kid does, whether autistic or not, right? So for that to happen, we need to make sure that there's provision, right? That there is adaptation, that this world can welcome them. And I think back to realizing that there's privilege, you know, maybe this is kind of what I wanted to say earlier with the resilience, and I forgot my train of thought. Thank you. The privilege, the fact that we bring it up all the time, is practically our nose to gratitude. We're very grateful. I know we are. We're grateful for every second. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made it this long, right?
Yeah.
So I don't need to know you from Adam to know that that's 100% something you remind yourself a few times a day, looking at yours and looking at the world and going like, this is a lot better than by far than anything else. With that said, like you very well pointed out, if we want to move it forward and if we want our kids to enter somewhere that's already prepared for that, we are behind the learning. My fear is, you're younger, your kid younger, my fear is of Amsterdam pineapples. Whenever are we done with fixing the space for them to enter? And the fear comes from when I look around, when I started, if you wish, talking about we are different leaders, we all have to admit that we can disclose if we have to. That was years and years ago, if you wish, or when I started talking about being different. But the world hasn't, in my opinion, moved at the speed that it would lead me to believe that in another 2 or 3 years that my boys that are now entering the world of work are gonna find it there. On the contrary, it feels like we're moving a lot slower than I would have liked. What would you say?
Yeah, look, it's a multi-generational fight. So this will be something that the next generation of activists will be dealing with long after you and I are dead. And I wish you a long life. But the reality is that we are also the kind of canaries in the goal in the mines, aren't we? I often come back to that point: is you get this right for your neurodivergent staff, and you get this right across your business. Listen to us, because actually where we're picking up improvements in the process, you know what? We're not terribly selfish. We actually think that this is a way that you could interact with your staff better. The thing that I keep coming back to is, rather than asking me as an employee, what reasonable adjustments do you need, etc., I want the dialogue to have evolved, and this isn't here now, but it will be in the future. I want the question to be, how do I get the best out of you as an employee? And that's the question you should be asking for the neurotypical folk as well as the neurodivergent folk. Because, sometimes we kind of demonize NTs, right? And sometimes we think that they're just an homogenous group of people, but they're not. They're incredibly varied themselves. So, we don't know what those NT folks are going through in their lives, etc. We don't know their differences. We don't know if they are undisclosed or undiscovered neurodivergent folk. What we're asking for is that kind of very human-centric approach. And good organisations are doing this already, right? The best organisers, the best managers you work for are those that know you inside out, that you're incredibly honest with. And you know what businesses get from those people, those employees? They get a lot happier employees. They get people who are incredibly loyal. They are resilient. They don't mind pushing for the extra mile, because they think, gosh, my boss knows me and I find valued here. And that's what we want to feel, isn't it? We want to feel valued in our organisations and appreciated for the additional strengths we can bring. But we're also respectful of the fact that we may need to be dealt with slightly differently in order to get the best out of us.
I love that perspective, but I won't lean into it because I don't think we've driven home what we need first before we will give back even more accommodation to the workplace. I'm sure you know what I mean. It's chiefly because we are all a lot as coming to the table in the workplace. I think there's a world of that, if you wish. And I know I come back continuously to the point of working to office work, if you wish, or working in technology. But the reason I do that is because I see every day in hundreds, thousands of teams, lots of burnout, and that is part of it is obviously workplace related and stress level and mental health issues from that, but equally, and obviously, like at the time of our life, we were finding this. I don't know when anyone's finding this podcast, but it's not very long after COVID, and just as we are picking up again, obviously living with an existential circle is not exactly an easy place to be. So all of these have come to be at a time where, unfortunately, diversity was taking a voice in most workplaces, where, unfortunately, we were stuck into finally land on there is no place in the workplace for lack of accommodation towards difference in gender as well. At least we were trying to do so. We were trying to land some landmarks of human visibility through workplace policy and through politics and through somewhat of a more civilized discourse. I don't feel we've necessarily landed any of those tenets in the workplace, in the office either, which is downright scary, because you are then left with multiple, like you say, parts of society that don't have the time and the funds to be doing this conversation about adaptation. So then you have an entire new generation that, comes up with a TikTok understanding of, I don't see that disparagingly, but on the contrary, the understanding of what's happening, and yet they come up against the structure that doesn't let them move. So what I'd like to hear from you is, what are the levers of this? How do we move society a lot faster? Are there political levers, or is this the bet that I'm making with our company every day? Like, for instance, we are only employing neurodiverse people, and I don't really care if that's positive discrimination in some places. I heard there is. We only employ people in places where that's okay. And what we do with that, I can harness so much out of my immensely neurodiverse team, and I wish other CEOs realize that's a thing. We get to have a very different way of working and to get to move ahead far faster. But like there won't be all enterprises. So the question becomes whether it's enterprise or it's public policy, whether it's other structures decided from like workers, whether it's people who are attending to keep all the structures happen. How do we move that understanding, like you say, forget awareness? Can we jump straight to appreciation? And how do we do that most efficient?
Yeah, well, look, I'll come back to public policy in a second, but my first point would be around the fact that I feel the reason why I set up NID is I've generally felt that corporate world could lead society, and I think we're demonstrating that. The reality is that a lot of what he's done has historically been done on good intentions, but conjecture. There wasn't really an academic science around it. One of the things we're really proud of within neurodiversity in business is that we've led with Birkbeck College, University of London, the first of its kind academic study of the supply versus the demand. So the supply, what are the corporates doing in this space? And the demand, actually, more importantly, what are the neurodivergent staff and the potential employees asking for? So we've done that now for a couple of years, and our academic research is free for everyone. But why we've done this is because you hit on the nail on the head earlier, which is this is a long-term play, and the way you influence the corporate world, particularly in the knowledge space, is those practitioners who are coming in at the early part of their career, the occupational psychologists, the HR leaders, the D&I practitioners. And you know what? As part of their training, they all refer back to academic research, but there hasn't been this. So that's why we've invested so much in trying to change societal understanding of neurodiversity in the workplace. The second point I'd like to refer to is around public policy. So we can all disparage politicians. It's a very kind of easy thing to do. But public policy is super important because actually there are big thematic gaps and challenges which only public policy will fill. For example, you and I know of the incredibly marginalised situation around young kids and diagnosis, assessments, lack of support. How fantastic would it be if actually universally children were screened for neurodivergency when they were very early, in primary school? Now that's something that we nearly got in the UK, and I was incredibly proud to support this. We had something called the Neurodiversity Screening and Teacher Training Bill, and it was only the early calling of an election in 2024 in the UK Parliament which pushed that bill to the side. Can other countries replicate that so that actually we understand our kids and that teachers are trained on how to support them? The reality and the depressing reality for me is in neurodiversity in business, we firmly deal with adults, so we don't focus on pre-18s. But often, by the time these kids and young adults are getting into the employment world, they've already been failed for 15 years. So we're dealing with, trying to repackage something which should have been dealt with and supported properly many years before.
I can't agree anymore. I see this as actually quite a lot more negative and downright gloom than maybe you've elegantly outlined it to be. I think education is failing our kids from all points of view. I simply don't see what value it has beyond, and this sounds horribly contentious, but in the way that it is presented these days, to me, it does feel like it is simply babysitting. So I wish that it moves towards actually giving people the tools that they need, start very early, that very human work related. They are very simple things that could be done year 3 or 4, I don't remember exactly what the research says, but for us to have changed society completely, indeed, as Dan said, that's where we start. We start with the schooling system, and we start with making sure that the number one thing that people focus on is that EQ first. We don't do that anywhere. I have seen examples of this, if I'm not wrong, in Australia and New Zealand. There are some societies that are pushing towards genuine curriculum around emotional intelligence. I think that's an immense piece of change that will in itself allow people to comprehend the idea of the very basic human concepts we're discussing here. Because let's be honest, if we had workplaces where there was enough human decency and kindness and understanding and open-heartedness and communication, and you name it, if we had workplaces where people were human to each other, we would not stand here to discuss adaptation necessarily. The reason we have that is because we don't have kindness, we don't have empathy, we don't have common communication that's open and open-hearted. What we don't really have, unfortunately, is, if you wish, a safety net of decent humanity.
You're right. Yeah, you're right. And look, I love that phrase you have around human debt. And I would double down on this. Let me conclude with a brief story. So with the Joshi man, we were for years kind of manage expectations down. We were told not to invest all our salary in expensive private speech therapy, etc. We were told that, don't go for technology. Look, and I've got something here, which is what we call his talker. Now, this actually allows him to communicate because he will put on and he will say, I want to go home, for example. Now, when he was at school recently, they did a class. It was just before Christmas, and they were asked to name all the vegetables coming in, and they were, it's designed to help them. And I had put on the little phrase for Brussels sprouts onto his talker. So Joshi, he sat there for a minute, and he looked at his talker, and he thought, and he wrote on there, I see small cabbage. And for me, that just blew my mind, because for many years we were told he didn't have the intellectual capability, he didn't understand what we were saying, he would never kind of communicate. And for him to problem solve and know, I don't have the words on this talker, but you know what? I can tell exactly. So there's such a big power of intelligence and understanding of potential with these non-speaking autistic kids that we need to be investing. And I call on governments, health authority, education authorities to be routinely funding these devices for non-speaking autistic people, because you would never, for a non-hearing person, you would never say to them, we're not going to give you the hearing aid, right? We're just going to allow you to do your best in lip reading. We need to invest in these kids. And you know what? We have an incredibly short-termist view. We need to be thinking about the total cost of the public purse across someone's life cycle. And all of the academic studies that we've seen are that if you invest in these kids at 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, that is where to spend your money. You don't want to be spending the money on the education prison type line. You don't want to be spending on additional benefits, health service, etc. You need to be investing in these kids early. And unfortunately, there are too many gatekeeping and financial considerations early on that we don't want to diagnose, and we don't want to put support in place. And you lose that ability, that window of opportunity.
So is this bill going to go back in then? Are we going to be able to know that the kids are autistic right away? And because look, let's be honest, and that's not going to help your kid. It's not going to help my kids. It's not going to help either of us. We are past that gateway. That stops sign. Unfortunately, we haven't stopped at it. No one has given us the needed support when we needed it. But that doesn't mean that the biggest change that we can as a society do is not repeat. So this kind of people on the class, are they in England, happily saying they these days, going to be able to screen every child for being autistic and then help them early on?
No, currently there is no legislative driver, so there is no champion within our new parliament to take this forward. However, you can bet your bottom dollar that I'm going to be pushing for it very, very hard.
Yeah,
I'm in Parliament tomorrow, and I'm meeting with all the new MPs, and I will be trying to identify who can actually lead us forward as a society, because you know what? if England or the UK can do this, and actually show what world-leading provision looks like, the rest of the world can follow. And I would be delighted if other countries lead and the UK follow as well.
Honestly, this is not at all about countries. It's about our kids. And I know that because I've had an autistic kid across 2 continents and then several countries. We found out that our child was autistic in Sweden. We then had him spend most of his autistic life in England, and then we now live in the south of Spain. But everywhere, how do I put this elegantly? Life is harder than it used to be, and people are less willing to be open and understanding of the need for provision for our kids. We know, and we are conscious, Dad and I, of the fact that different kids and different autistic families have different needs. But I think with this episode, hopefully brings you awareness towards is that despite the fact that we have a day job, I make software and I write, then does consulting, this is to us parenting fights so that we live a better world in terms of being NeuroSpicy. But I think what is interesting in this one episode that I haven't said before necessarily is that we are not thinking of ourselves as often as we should as an autistic family. And I'm wondering if you guys are. I don't know why not. It's potentially because each of us and in our family, there are very few exceptions to being autistic, let me put it that way. We struggle to find the exception. But I'm just thinking we are not thinking as an entity who is autistic, us as a family, simply because we all have such different needs for different provision, but also because maybe to a degree we don't expect society to view us favorably if we are an autistic family. How do you feel that when you're at? Do you refer to yourself as that?
Well, look, I don't think I would express it more eloquently than you just did. I think, it's correct, is that I don't think even within the autistic community and self-advocates that there is that encapsulation of, a family unit being autistic. I think you're very kind of on the vanguard and being very progressive there. I think also the reality is that we know about the genetic drivers for autism, and we know that there are a disproportionate amount of kind of autistic families out there together, but they don't talk about it. And like for me and maybe for others, is that society still views autistic people as being, white young boys lining up trains, right? Or they'll view them as one of the worst things that happened for our community, Rain Man, the film, right? So what I'm really proud of what you're doing and other activists is actually there is such a breadth of autistic people out there that you can't judge us based on that media narrative. You have to judge us of we're in society. We are the 1 in 5. 1 in 5 of our workforce is neurodivergent. We're a minority, but we're a significant minority. So you're going to have to start properly engaging and supporting and empowering us.
The question if it's 1 in 5, and if it is, it's shame on us. It's so simply because we're not smart enough to bring more numbers in. I would say that the numbers are probably half and half. I would be very surprised if in the workplace, and in particular in some industries, they're not reversed in the other way around. But irrespective of which numbers you believe, as long as you have a handful of humans that you derive value of, then you can bring value back to by doing the simple act of acting human, and by doing the simple act of saying, what is your ReadMe? How do you function? What do you need to be a full-on human being that's happy at work? Ask them. Most people these days, in particular those of us that are neurodiverse, have this form of a ReadMe. And if you don't and you're listening to this, consider making one over the summer. Spend a few weeks going, what would I give my new clinic lawyer? What would I say to them that I am like? Because it's nice hearing about it, but if you don't have it yourself, and I have one, but it's awfully complicated. No one's asked me about it over the last 20 years that I've run my own company. But I do give it. We do exchange this as new people come into the team. That simple and genuine ReadMe in the same way that kind of real programs used to have back in the day, so you understood what they were about. That's how we kind of hand each other a paper, ideally not longer than 1 page, say this is what I'd like to see happening. If we can, great. It's not great again.
I agree. And, the way to actually make that successful is to embed it in BAU. So it needs to be not for the neurodivergent folk. It needs to be every time you're starting a new project, you have this, we call it a manual of me. And it says, this is me, this is how to work with me, this is how I like to work, this is how I like to communicate. And that manual of me, the only way we can destigmatize it is if everyone in the project team does it. And then, the autistic person is just one person on that long spectrum of people, and that person, he or she, is slightly different. But you know what? The neurotypical person is also different.
Right. That's very, very true. I love that note. And, realistically, the people listening to us don't like listening to very long things. So we're probably going to have to wrap it up soon. But what I did here before then, really, you've mentioned a couple of things. I normally ask people what are the 2 or 3 misconceptions which are most annoyed about hearing when it comes to autism, and you've already mentioned the horrendous Rain Man situation. But I am wondering, when it comes to another thing that I do attempt to ask people, because I know it's personal, but it's useful, and we all learn from the shared experience of others, is what is your biggest life hack as an autistic person? Kind of what is the one thing that you'd say, this is a thing that has pulled me through?
I think it's just self-awareness. I think it's understanding, how do I work best? How are you going to get the best out of me? And then playing to those strengths, because the reality is that we don't need to hide away from our challenges or our differences. Everyone has them, okay? I'm not going to be a World Cup footballer, right? So I can admit that. No, not at my age. But you know what I am good at? I'm really good at, setting up a charity. I'm really good at kind of leading a group of 100 volunteers, etc. So my strengths are things that I can be shouting about, and I shouldn't be embarrassed to admit that I have areas that I have areas for development on.
That is a very good point. And I think the more we can, like we started talking about this at the very beginning, the more we can overcome this negative energy towards autism stigma and transform it into enthusiasm around autism, and considering extreme value that is literally latent in enterprises these days and in the public sector these days. There are people everywhere trying to hide having special abilities, is what I say. So let's get them to admit they have them. Let's get them to see that they are valued. Let's get them to potentially function in the ways that they would more find comfort. If we can, if we can't, and it is necessarily detrimental to the business, I have yet to find one autistic person that is asking for an adaptation that would hurt the business. I'm sure they might be some.
That's wonderful to hear. It's wonderful to hear.
Feel free to tell them to go left, but I've never heard of anyone autistic who didn't want something that also brought up the rest of the business. Thank you so much for coming over, Dan, and for talking about this, both as yourself, the human, indeed yourself as the activist, and as yourself as the part of this autistic family, both of humans and of your own. So for a better world for our kids, we'll just keep pushing. If you guys are listening to this, and you can find Dan obviously on LinkedIn and connect, because if we don't get more neurodiversity in business and we don't actually find ways to extract the goodness and the human goo out of it all, then the ones losing are not us, the neurodiverse people, but the business itself.
Right, absolutely. What else?
Thank you for coming over, Dan, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.
Appreciate your time.